but he decided he decided to take a vacation that summer. He bought an interest in a gold mine that had never panned out, and he and some friends and family spent the summer basically prospecting this gold mine. And some historians have interpreted this to mean that he was, trying to strike it rich, or somehow that it was foreshadowing Lou's future husband's career in the mining business. But I don't think there's really much evidence of that. It seems to me, from what I've read of his writings and the family, that it was more of a lark. It was a vacation, but a chance to get some dirt under his fingernails and try something new. There certainly weren't gold mines in Iowa. And but in any event, whatever the motivation was, he spent most of the summer at this mine not far from Acton, California, and Lou camped there for quite a bit of that time as well. And she would go into town to get supplies, pick up the mail, and such. And so this photo was taken by the proprietor of the general store there, who was also the town photographer, and I think probably the postmaster. And he had seen Lou coming and going, and on this particular day persuaded her to pose for his camera. And so, of course, she's sitting on their mule, and some folks have looked at this and said, "Aha, she's a proper lady. She's riding side saddle." But there's actually no saddle there. There's no, you can't see any stirrup or anything. Probably this was just a pack mule, and she just hopped up on its back to pose for the photo. Certainly, she then and for the rest of her life, she was a very accomplished rider, and she rode astride. One of her college friends said she rode like a centaur. And so in this case, this isn't a riding animal. This appears to be just a pack animal that she was posing on. She has a rifle in her hand. She was a good shot, and not afraid to use it. And so this is the kind of person that Lou was as a youngster. And so the next big turning point in her life then was when she went to Stanford University. She took a little bit of a detour. So she graduated from high school in Whittier, California, and she didn't really know what she was going to do. And there weren't a whole lot of fields open to women, though there were more and more things available compared to, say, her mother's generation or a couple of generations before. And so she ended up going to teacher college, or as they called it then, normal school. And she did 2 years at Los Angeles Normal, which is now UCLA. And then her dad got a job at a bank in Monterey, up in near the Bay Area. And so she did her 3rd year of teacher training at well, it was then called San Jose Normal School. It's now San Jose State University. And so she graduated in 1893 with her teaching certificate. And from 1893 to 1894, she worked basically kind of different odd jobs. She spent some time working in her father's bank. She, of course, loved her father, admired him, and would have liked nothing better than to follow in his footsteps in the banking industry. But both she and her dad were very aware that she had no future in banking other than perhaps as a clerk or something, because it was a man's business. And she substitute taught some that year, including she did a long-term stint, several weeks, as a 3rd grade teacher. But she discovered she really didn't enjoy teaching. She was of the opinion that children should spend as much time as possible outdoors, and maybe a little bit of reading, writing, and arithmetic were justified, but things like geography and history and science could wait until they were what today we would call junior high or high school age. So in the summer of 1894, she was casting about, trying to figure out what she was going to do with her life. And she attended a lecture, a geology lecture by Professor Branner, who's the bald man here in the on my slide. And he was a very dynamic speaker, and she was absolutely hooked. And she thought that studying geology sounded just incredible. And so in the fall of 1894, she became a freshman at Stanford University. Now, Stanford at that time was a small liberal arts college, basically. It had opened in 1891. It was just getting going. These photos are a couple of photos from that time period of the campus as it was being built. It was still under construction. And the programs were still under construction in a lot of ways. And it was a very kind of forward-looking college. It was co-ed from the beginning at a time when co-ed colleges were somewhat unusual. And they brought in a variety of professors from back east with a lot of progressive ideas about education and what that would look like in the at the dawn of the 20th century. And but Lou had found her niche. She wanted to be a geology student, of course. So she jumped in with both feet, just like everything else she did, and she was very successful at what she did. Because of her social standing and her parents' relative affluence, she was a sorority girl. She joined Kappa Kappa Gamma, and but she just took to her studies with vigor. The one story that at the beginning of her first year, she was the only female geology major. Now, there were other female students who took geology courses as part of their coursework, but they weren't geology majors. And so, of course, one of the kind of questions that a lot of the boys were wondering is, how is she going to do field work? And so at some point in the fall semester, they were heading out to scrounge around for rocks on the hillsides around campus. And Lou was going to go along, and the boys are, how's this going to work? What are we going to have to, help her along and such? So they're heading out from campus, and they come to a fence, and the boys a couple of them are whispering, are we going to have to heft her over the fence? How's this going to work? Well, she just vaulted the fence and kept on going, and they had to catch up. And that was kind of the way she operated all the way through. So, of course, besides geology, the other important thing about her time at Stanford was she met a young man named Herbert Hoover. And here's another excerpt from that independent girl essay she wrote when she was 15. She wrote, "But sooner or later, she, the independent girl, is sure to meet a spirit equally as independent as her own. And then there's a clash of arms ending in mortal combat, or they unite their forces and with combined strength go forth to meet the world." Well, she and Herbert Hoover combined their forces. He was a senior that year while she was a freshman, and even though he was actually a few months younger than she. And so he was well established in the geology department, and there are several versions of story of how they met. But certainly they spent a lot of time together in the classroom and out in the fields around Palo Alto, and they got to know each other and to like each other quite well. But then, of course, at the end of the school year, Bert graduated. He earned his bachelor's degree and he went out into the world. But Lou had 3 more years at Stanford. And so, of course, they had a lot in common, but they were also very different in some ways. They both were originally from Iowa. Both had moved away in their early teenage years and finished their growing up on the West Coast. Of course, they both loved the outdoors, and they both loved geology, so they obviously shared that. But Bert was he was nowhere near as affluent as Lou. He had been orphaned at the age of 9 and had moved to Oregon to live with on the charity of an uncle when he was 11 and spent his teenage years in Oregon. When he came to Stanford, he had a small nest egg left from um, his parents' estate, but it was nowhere near enough to pay for his expenses at Stanford. At that point, there was no tuition. Tuition was free, but he still had to, of course, cover room and board and books and other expenses. And so he spent his 4 years at Stanford scrambling around, working odd jobs, starting his own business in some cases. He ran a laundry delivery service at one point. And of course, he was not a fraternity boy. In fact, he was known on campus as kind of one of the leaders of what they called the barbarians, the non-fraternity set. And he ran for student body treasurer, and was, a big part of that the non-fraternity set on campus. But somehow or another, they got past their differences and found themselves attracted to each other. And but then Bert went away at the end of the year, and of course he for about a year he worked various jobs in the western part of the U.S. But then in 1897 he got his big break. He was hired by a British company, Buick Mooring and Company, to be one of their mine managers in Australia. And so he spent almost 2 years in Australia. Well, during this time, we know that Bert and Lou wrote numerous letters, surely numerous letters, back and forth to each other. Unfortunately, only one single letter survives. The most plausible explanation is that somewhere probably in the 1950s, Bert went through and culled out their personal correspondence. And it was his right to do so. I mean, it's their private business. But of course, those of us who've come after would really like to know what it was that they were writing about and how their relationship developed. But alas, we don't. All we know is that in 1899, he was promoted to be his company's chief mining engineer and manager in China. And so Hoover went from Australia to London to meet with his bosses, and then all the way across the Atlantic and across the United States to California, where in February of 1899, he and Lou Henry were married in the living room of her parents' home. And apparently, until he showed up a few days before the wedding was scheduled, he had not actually met her parents. Sounds kind of awkward to me. But Florence Henry said, "We had made up our minds not to like him very well, as he was going to take Lou so far away. But after he'd been here a few days, I think we all liked him about as much as Lou did." In any event, they were married, and a few hours later, they got on a boat and went off to his job in China. So they lived in China for a couple of years, and this is where things sort of start going a couple of different directions with Lou. So she had finished her degree, her bachelor's degree at Stanford. She was the first woman to receive a degree in geology at Stanford. She was certainly not the first woman in the United States to receive a degree in geology. In fact, there were at least 2 women that had doctorates in geology at that point. But it was very unusual and certainly rare. But immediately after graduation, we have a fantastic letter that she wrote to a friend complaining about how it meant nothing because she couldn't get a job. What she really wanted to do was to be a field geologist. And she had, in fact, gotten Professor Branner to try to see if he could hook her up with a job with the U.S. Geological Survey. But of course, that didn't work. They weren't interested in hiring women at the time. There were some folks that suggested to her that she think about doing lab work, that she could possibly work in a lab and maybe do some teaching, and that she could find a niche in the geology world that way. but that didn't appeal to her. So when they got to China, of course, Bert is traipsing all over China, looking at mines for his company, and Lou, for the most part, didn't. They set up their household in the city of Tianjin, which is near Beijing. It was where there was a foreign concession, which meant like a little town that was set up for foreign visitors like themselves. And for its main purpose was for trading, but they were also allowed to live there. And so Lou set up a household there. They eventually rented this house here, this imposing brick house on Racecourse Road. She was already fairly well versed from learning from her mother how to run an upper middle class household. They'd always had at least one servant during her growing up years. In China, she needed to up the game a little bit for the status of her husband. She needed at least 8 servants in order to not to be embarrassing to the folks that Bert worked with. And what she didn't know about running a household, especially the problems of dealing with the Chinese culture, she learned from the other women in the foreign concession there. And that's not to say that she was idle. She took Chinese lessons. She got very interested in a variety of things. She started collecting porcelains. She kept pretty busy, but she wasn't doing any geology for the most part. We do have some letters that indicate that she did go on one trip out into the field with Bert in probably October of 1899. Now, this isn't just Bert and Lou on horses, going off on their own to look for minerals. Bert was of high enough stature that he had to have quite the entourage in order to save face as he traveled around the country. He had to have a cavalry escort of at least 15 soldiers. He had to have a variety of servants and animals and wagons and such. He had to have a high-end cook to go along with him. So this was not a small operation. And but they were not happy to have Lou coming along. They really didn't want a woman along. And but she did go on at least one trip. And she also apparently went down in some of the mines with him, which was already scandalous enough. The Chinese people thought it was bad enough for Bert to be going down in the mines. Somebody as important as him, he was supposed to just stay up above ground and talk to the lower ranking people. But the idea that a woman would go down in the mines was even more scandalous. And Lou wrote to Professor Branner afterwards that she was amused. As soon as she came out of the mines, some of the workers went racing in with firecrackers to set them off and scare away the bad spirits that she had taken into the mine. So she did get a little bit of field work, but not much. And it was it sort of foreshadowed the way that a lot of her married life went. So of course, then things got very exciting in 1900. There was a uprising called the Boxer Rebellion, and the Hoovers were trapped in the city of Tianjin for about a month in the summer of 1900. The Boxers and their allies were sort of attacking piecemeal. If they'd made a real effort, they probably would have overrun the town. But fortunately for the civilians who were there, like the Hoovers, there were some small contingents of European soldiers that were there that were able to kind of protect the settlement through the siege. But Lou thought of it, this was a great adventure. She wrote to her friend afterwards, "You missed one of the opportunities of your life, the most interesting siege and bombardment of the age." And it's just a footnote in most history books now, because it really wouldn't have mattered if whether the siege was successful or not. The civilians that were in Tianjin there was no strategic gain whether they lived or died. The main focus of the rebellion was the diplomatic legations in Beijing, and that was what captured people's attention at the time, and that was what the fighting was mostly about. But the folks in Tianjin did endure quite a bit of bombardment. The Boxers got a hold of some modern Krupp field guns, like the one that we have Lou leaning against in this photo. And they did fire thousands of artillery shells into the town during that month-long siege. But fortunately for the Hoovers, a multinational army came and rescued them. It was on its way to Beijing. And in August, the Hoovers were able to escape. And it was at that point that the big turning point in Herbert Hoover's life occurred. That was when he basically made an important business deal that converted his company's investments. They were basically at that point investing in Chinese mining companies because it was illegal for European countries or European businesses to own the actual mines. But what Hoover basically did is he set up a shell corporation to control all of the mining properties that his company was invested in. And as a result, then they would be protected by the British government and British troops. And this was a very astute thing that he did, and it preserved his company's investments, and his bosses were incredibly pleased that he'd taken the initiative to do this. So as a result, he was given a promotion and became a partner in the company, Bewick Mooring and Company. And then he and Lou, they basically set up their main home base in London, and he began traveling all over the world, investigating and evaluating the mining properties for Bewick Mooring. So for the next 13, almost 14 years, that's what they did. In the early years, of course, it was just Bert and Lou, and she would travel with him to various exotic places, though she usually didn't go to the mines. She would just stay in the cities nearby while he went to do the mining work. And then, of course, as time went on, they had 2 children came along. Herbert Jr. was born in 1903 in August, and within weeks of his birth, the family was off to Australia, and he, by the time he was a year old, had already gone all the way around the world. Alan, that was the second son, he was born in 1907. So on my slide here, I've got some just photos of some of the various places and people that they visited. The bottom left corner there, that's Lou with her sister Jean doing a traditional Japanese tea ceremony in Japan. The upper left picture there is Lou entertaining some folks. We've never identified them exactly, but they are either from Burma or India, and they apparently are, some sort of mine owners or something that had come with Bert in London. The bottom right one is Lou and Bert in Venice along the way there. So during these travels, one of the things that they did is they worked on a project together to translate a medieval mining treatise called De Re Metallica. And this, in some ways, was Lou's high water mark as a geologist and a scholar. She was the one who actually came up with the project. So this book was written in the 16th century, and it recorded all of the techniques and technology of medieval mining. And it was written in this medieval Latin. And the problem was that when the author, Agricola, had written it, he had basically coined hundreds of terms in kind of faux Latin in order to to describe what he was writing about. And so uh, there had been some translations into German, but they were not very good. And there had been attempts to translate it into other languages, including English, but the translators always fell apart on these weird Latin mining terms that they didn't understand. And so Mrs. Hoover was very adept at languages, and so that was right up her alley. Though she didn't know much German, so they had to hire some help with the when they were comparing the Latin with the some of the early German um, translations, and they also hired sort of clerical help along the way and some research help. But for the most part, it was a project that the two of them worked on, and it was something that they'd take along with them on ships as they sailed, because of course that it wasn't there was no jet travel, so to get from London to Australia was weeks on a ship, not hours or days. And so they would work on this project, and Lou did much of the language work, and Bert's main contribution was helping to kind of decipher some of these mining terms that Agricola had invented, and even doing lab experiments and such to try to figure out exactly what he was talking about. And so they finished this project, this mammoth undertaking, in 1912, and they had it privately published, and in sort of a facsimile edition. That's what's on the left side of the screen here, is a picture of the binding. So they had it printed and bound to look like a 16th century book, and they really are very impressive volumes. We of course have several of them at the museum. But the one of the really fascinating things is that their translation has remained in print ever since. You can still to this day buy Dover editions, for example, of this translation, because it was a fantastic job, and and they were recognized for it. The American Institute of Mining and Metallurgical Engineers in 1914 gave them jointly a medal for the work that they did on this translation, and that's a photo of that actual medal on display in our museum. And if you can read the writing on it, it does have both of their names. And of course, some folks have said, well, it was really Bert's project and Lou just helped. Other folks, oh no, it was really Lou's project and Bert just helped. But from their perspective, they both felt and said to others that it was truly a joint project, and that they were both equally involved and responsible for the success of it. Now, the fun part about it, when the medal was awarded, Lou was the one who went to accept it, and she gave this very charming speech about saying how she has two small boys, and they are very tuned in to things like medals and trophies, and they were very disappointed that mom and dad didn't have any, and that now she was going to have a medal, and so that was going to really help out her status with her sons. So, as I mentioned, the two kids came along in 1903 and 1907, and like any other family, things kind of got put aside. Those first few years, before the kids came along, Lou kept these fantastic scrapbooks and took all kinds of photos of their trips and things, and then it all sort of peters out, and because of course she's busy with the kids. And the photo here on the left, this one's really fun, is that's Herb Jr.'s first Christmas. They were in a hotel in New Zealand, and so Bert is the man standing up, and Lou is one of the ladies seated. The man in the front and the woman holding Herb Jr. are friends, and the the other woman in the picture there is the nurse that traveled with them. But they were in a hotel in New Zealand, and they borrowed the tree or potted plant or whatever it is from the lobby in order to have a little sort of a Christmas tree for Herb's first Christmas. So, of course, the Hoovers, for the Hoovers' mining career, the family's involvement in the mining business, took a decided detour during World War One. Of course, a lot of Bert's mining investments and properties were confiscated or lost during the war. But of course, what he did was to become involved with the relief of Belgium. And this was actually something that Lou also participated in. So at the beginning of the war, when civilians in Belgium were running out of food, Bert was asked to help organize a food relief program, and which he did, and he did an incredible job, and it made him world famous. Lou helped out at the beginning in some ways. She came back to the U.S. and began raising money and awareness, especially in California. But once the commission got going fairly well, she kind of took a back seat and spent more time taking care of her kids and also taking care of their homes, both in London and back in the U.S. And this is I guess what I'd say is this is sort of the pattern of how Lou navigated the world. She had lots of energy and she was involved with many things, but when Bert got into a big project, the Commission for Relief in Belgium, or the U.S. Food Administration a few years later, or Secretary of Commerce in the 1920s, or of course the White House as president, she always took the back seat and tried to stay out of the limelight and not overshadow him in any way. And so some historians have seen her as sort of the last of the old-fashioned first ladies who were mostly in charge of social events and not much else, which isn't really accurate because she still was involved with a lot of things, but she tried to keep it very quiet and not be as so very visible as to overshadow what Bert was doing. Of course, she is well known for being involved with the Girl Scouts. I don't have any idea why she got started with the Girl Scouts, because she had two boys, right? But she started working with Girl Scouts in Washington, D.C. during World War I. And that led to years of work as an administrator and even the national president of the Girl Scouts. And it again shows some of the same dichotomy. She wanted girls to have the same kind of outdoor experiences that she had had, but there was a lot of pressure for the Girl Scouts they could do outdoor things, but they needed to put some emphasis on domestic things like learning to take care of a household and cook and things. And that was not of interest to Lou, but she went along with it because she didn't want to rock boats. She didn't want to make scenes. Another good example is women's suffrage. Early on, as a teenager, she wrote about why women should have a vote. And she never changed her attitude, but her approach to it was she thought that the appropriate way to do it was gradually. And so during the 19-teens, when you have a lot of agitation and parades and sit-ins and other sorts of protests from women, that wasn't her thing. And she had a friend who was a suffragette. She got arrested in England for trying to help them organize women's suffrage protests, and she had some difficulties here in the U.S. And she ran for Congress. I think it was the 1918 election, and she lost. And Lou wrote her a letter and said, I'm sorry that you lost your election. And I'm sorry that we don't see eye to eye on how this, the things should be done. Um, but I share your vision for the eventual goal of women's suffrage. So this was the way that Lou functioned throughout her life. She was a high energy, very capable person, but always um, uh, kind of falling back into conventional roles and expectations. Um, so that's Lou Henry Hoover's life in a nutshell. She died fairly young at 69 in 1944, and her husband outlived her by 20 years. And her papers, of course, are now at the Hoover Presidential Library, and I think there are many people, certainly including me, who think that she deserves more study than she has received. But in comparison with later first ladies who were much more visible, much more out there, she's not gotten the attention that perhaps she would deserve. So I'll stop there and ask if there are questions or comments or anything that I could that you'd like to discuss.
We're muted.
You can unmute yourselves if you'd like to speak, or if you would prefer to put any questions in the chat, you're also welcome to do that.
Yeah, this is Bill Wilson. Spenser, that was very, very interesting. And you kind of cleared up something that I'm one of the directors at the National Mining Hall of Fame and Museum and worked very closely with Elizabeth. So I've learned a lot about the Hoovers from Elizabeth, but there was always two versions that Mr. and Mrs. Hoover were actually mining engineers, and I heard the other version was that they both got degrees in geology. So you've solidified that misinformation that's been floating around for quite a while. And
Yes.
also, as a metallurgical engineer, I've kind of skimmed through a copy. I don't have a copy of De Re Metallica, but if you really dig into it, it's an amazing book. And
Oh, yes.
the broad participants in our industry, geologists, mining engineers, metallurgical engineers, always find it interesting because it ties a lot of things together that go back, 400 years. So those are just comments. And the last question, I guess that last question I had, what was her role in the White House? You mentioned a little bit, but that was in the late 20s, and it was probably pretty difficult for her to have a high profile.
Yes. So yeah, she's typically seen again as sort of the last of the non-activist first ladies, which isn't strictly true. She was still involved with charitable activities, especially as the Depression got going. But again, she tried to keep things kind of quiet so as not to overshadow her husband's administration. One of the amazing things that she did that wasn't known at all until, certainly it wasn't known until after she died, to almost anybody, and not to the public until probably the 1980s, was how much charity she organized behind the scenes as First Lady. So we have thousands and thousands of letters that were written into her from people asking for all kinds of help. Simple things like, could you send me some old drapes that I could use to make clothes for my kids? Or my husband is a veteran and he lost his job. Can you help me, get benefits that he is entitled to? And what she did was she would write. She and her secretaries would write quietly to people to solve these issues. where, you know, somebody at the local level, somebody at the state level, somebody at the federal level, and but it was always quiet. And uh, the Hoovers were very strong believers in the idea that charity and good works are not what you do for people to see, right? The biblical admonition to that if you are rewarded on earth, that you've gotten all the reward that you should. And so they, as a general rule, that was the way they lived their lives. But as First Lady, the amount of charitable activities that she coordinated and nobody knew that she was doing it is just amazing. I wanted to touch back on your comment about mining engineering. Part of the issue or the discrepancy, if you will, is that Mr. Hoover referred to himself as a mining engineer, but it was at a time when engineering wasn't as professionally defined as it is now in the 20th and 21st century. And he didn't have an engineering degree, and he wasn't really doing mining engineering in most cases. He was a geologist first and foremost, and where his real talent lay was in being able to evaluate rock formations and such for whether they might or might not be profitable. Now, he did have a lot of technical knowledge. Okay, what's it going to cost? How are we going to set it up in order to get these minerals out of the ground? And so to that extent, he was doing some engineering. But by the time you even get to 1901, so he's only been working in the mining industry for essentially 5 to 6 years at this point, he really had moved into what we would today call management and finance. He's not the guy on the ground, running a mine or making the technical decisions about extraction processes or smelting or anything like that. He's figuring out which mining investments, which mining properties might be profitable, what they need to do to make something profitable, and then lining up the financing. And so I tend to prefer to use the term mine manager, but even that is not quite accurate. He was a geologist, financier, a manager. He had technical capabilities, but he wasn't an engineer in the modern sense. But he called himself an engineer, so you have to give him a little bit of leeway for that.
No, and thank you, Spenser, because there's a lot of people in our industry that have that broad skill set, and so he was really doing what a lot of other managers have done over the years. So I think that's a good explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So it looks like we have a comment from Carolyn in the chat as well. She says, "Thank you very much. Excellent. I noticed that the Hoover Museum website that there's no mention of her being inducted into the National Mining Hall of Fame and only a brief mention of her work on Dairy Metallica." Did you have anything else to add about that, Spenser?
I assume that that's the reference to our brief biography that we have on our website. Yeah, our website is, it's certainly not in, there's no way it's going to have everything in it. So I'm not sure who wrote it, but the brief biography that we have there is geared more for the kind of casual person who just wants to know a little bit about Lou, and so those aspects were not we're left on the cutting room floor, I guess. Yeah, and really, she needs and deserves a sizable scholarly biography, and that's never been done. There have been a few books written about her, but not much. And I mean, some of the things that she did could be a book in themselves. The Girl Scouts. I mean, she was an incredibly important figure in the early development of the Girl Scouting movement in the United States. But again, she tried to stay behind the scenes. Yes, she was the national president twice, and you can't be a national president and not be visible. But so much of her work was quiet letters to people, raising funds outside of the public eye, things like that. Her involvement with women's athletics in the 1920s, trying to figure out what women's athletics are going to look like, and some of the groundwork that she laid in that area led decades later to women getting athletic opportunities that weren't even, they couldn't even think of in the 1920s, Title IX and such. So there's so much that could be said about her. But again, everything was so quiet and behind the scenes that it's not dramatic, right? And drama is what sells, I guess. Perhaps that's the explanation.
Thank you so much. Just a couple last little tidbits about Lou Henry Hoover at the Mining Hall of Fame. She is inductee number 60, and she was inducted in 1990. And we actually do also have a signed copy of De Re Metallica signed by Herbert Hoover that is on display because he is also a part of our Mining Hall of Fame. Did anybody else have any other questions for Spenser, either out loud or in the chat? Give people a second to type if they need to.
Thank you so much for joining us, Spenser. This is Elizabeth. So we really appreciate you coming on and helping us teach about Lou Henry and for teaching about Herbert Hoover as well.
Sure. Glad to be here and always happy to share.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.